If you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you will have heard me banging on about the Line 6 Helix. But in all that time, I've never actually addressed what the Helix is. So, in today's video, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So, this is my Line 6 Helix. This was my main gig in Helix up until recently till I got my second one, but since been retired to just live in the studio to do all my recording and YouTube work. But prior to that, it's done well over 1,000 shows. Hence why it's looking a little bit battered. So, what is the Line 6 Helix? At its absolute basic, it is a multi-effects processor for guitar and bass. But it's actually so much more than that. Just to list off some of the things that it can do, yes, it is a multi-effects processor. It also does amp simulation, it's an IR loader, it's a USB interface. It can be used as a 4-channel mixer with 4 independent lines of audio. You can use it to do effects on microphone inputs, guitar, bass. You could even plug keyboards into this thing. It can be used as an entire control center for a much bigger rig with multi-amp setups, external effects, other pedals. So to just label it as a multi-effects unit, I think is a little bit unfair because it does so much more. So let's start with Helix anatomy. The Helix Floor, which is the unit that I've got here, which is the main flagship unit, and was the first Helix unit released back in about 2015, 2016, is a 12 foot switch unit with a built-in expression pedal. It has a 6.2 inch 800 by 480 full color LCD screen, custom Scribble strips, and 6 rotary encoders. First, let's talk about them foot switches. These are no ordinary foot switches. These are what are called capacitive foot switches. And what that means is you can actually access parameters assigned to that foot switch without even pressing the foot switch down. All you have to do is tap the switch and it'll bring up the parameters relating to that foot switch. So for example, I have this foot switch here, labeled clean, assigned to change between 2 different amps on this patch. So when I press it, you can see it jumps between a few different things. If I actually want to see the parameters associated with what that switch is doing, I can just tap it. And each time I tap that switch, you can see it's going through all the things that are actually associated with that pedal. This makes your workflow super fast when building patches and wanting to change things on the fly. For example, let's say that I want to change the gain on this Minotaur pedal. Well, all I have to do is touch the switch and it brings up all the parameters associated with that pedal. So you can see that the rotary encoders have changed the parameters that belong to that pedal. So I can just use those to change the gain. And it really is as quick and easy as that. Say I want to change something on my delay on this pedal here, tap it once, brings up all the parameters belonging to that delay. Super quick and super easy. Another cool thing that these capacitive foot switches allow you to do is to swap the placement of pedals really quickly. You just hold the 2 that you want to swap. It'll ask if you want to swap them, you just say yes. And now all the assignments that belong to those 2 switches have been swapped around. Easy. Just above each row of foot switches, we have a row of Scribble strips. These are one of my absolute favorite features of the Helix. By default, they'll just display the name of the foot pedal that foot switch is assigned to, but you can actually have them say anything that you want. For example, let's say that I wanted to change what this Scribble strip said right above this foot switch here. Well, just be a case of tapping and holding it, going to customize, and now I can type in anything I want to appear on that Scribble strip. I find this really useful on stage as you can often forget what you've assigned to which switch, and it means that you don't have to change anything in the actual display. It all appears on the Scribble strips. And that's one of the really great things about Helix, it's customization. You're not limited to using Helix in the way that it comes as default. You can change so many of the parameters to make the unit work for you. One really good example of that is if we go into preset mode, you can see that when I'm in preset mode, I have 4 presets labeled across the top, and then I have snapshots labeled across the middle section of the bottom switches. This isn't the way that Helix comes as default, this is an option that I've changed in the custom settings. And that's not to say that you'd have to have it this way either. There are numerous options of the way that you can actually lay out Helix to make it best work for you. For example, you might just want all your presets laid out in one go. You can do that easy enough. You might just want to see snapshots, you might just always want to see your pedals. Whichever's the easiest way for you to work, there's probably an option for you to have it do that in Helix. So those are the little screens on Helix. What about the massive screen at the top of the unit? This thing is awesome. It's so big and so bright that you can see it from anywhere on stage. And that's a really big selling point for me, especially when you go into the tuner. Because the screen is so big and so bright, I can stand right at the back of stage, still be able to see this tuner, get my guitar in tune, not have to stand right at the front of the stage where my pedal board is, right at the back of stage, tuning out of the way, and still be able to see this nice clear display. Unfortunately, with the Helix now being around 6 years old, it is not a touch screen, maybe on Helix 2. Another thing that makes the Helix so great to use is how easy it is to use because of this massive screen. It's really easy to see how your patches are laid out, and the way the Helix works is it uses this block system. So each of the blocks that you see here represents either a pedal or an amp or some type of effect, and it's really easy to understand how things are working. You have your inputs on the left side, your outputs on the right side, and you can really easily see the signal flow moving through the preset. And the way Line 6 have designed this interface makes it super easy to get going and build in really good sounding presets. Let me show you how quickly we can build a preset from nothing. So I'm in a brand new blank preset. Let's set up a preset with an amp, a cab, maybe a few effects before the amp, and maybe a few effects after the amp. And let's see how long it takes. So there you go, it really is that quick. I've built a whole preset. We've got a Brit Plexi amp. It's going into a 412 with greenback 25s. In the front of the amp, we've got a Scream 808, so a tube screamer. Then got a Minotaur, so that's like a clon pedal. Behind the amp, we've got the transistor tape delay, and we've got the 63 spring reverb. All set up super quick. And one of the cool things about the way these pedals and amps load up is the default sounds on them are really, really good. There's not a whole lot of tweaking that you have to do to get them where you want them. They sound great straight out the back. And talking to these blocks, that leads us on to the next thing. When it comes to cabs, you're not stuck using the cabs that are built into Helix. Helix is actually quite a comprehensive IR loader. So if we go over to where that cab is, I can click on it, I can go down to impulse response, and then I can load a whole load of any of the impulse responses that I have put onto Helix. And it's really easy to do through the HX Edit software. It's just a case of hooking up to the computer via USB and dragging over the impulse responses that you want to load onto the Helix. And then you can just select them really easy right there in the interface. If you've got yourself a Helix and you've not yet tried using some third-party IRs, I would highly recommend giving it a shot. For me, it was the thing that took the Helix from being pretty good to a whole new level. And now I very rarely use the built-in cabs. I'm pretty much 100% on third-party IRs. And if you want to check out some of my favorite IRs that I'm using at the moment, check in the description box below. The Helix actually has 128 user slots where you can load any third-party IR that you want to load, from companies like Phonehammer, 3 Sigma Audio, Celestion, whoever it is that you've got your third-party IRs from, you can easily get them into the Helix and use them with the sounds that you've already made. Instead of using the built-in cabs, you just swap that block out for an IR block. And in terms of blocks, there is a whole load of stuff to choose from in the Helix. According to the Line 6 website at the time of making this video, there are 62 amps, 37 cabs, 16 microphones, and 104 effects pedals to choose from. That is a whole load of gear packed into one single unit. For the amps, we've got pretty much every kind of amp that you could want covered, anything from pristine Fender cleans, through to mid-breakup kind of Marshall-y tones. All the way up to really high gain beasts. Pedals, there's all the usual suspects in there, things like tube screamers, phase 90s, chorus pedals, delays, reverbs, but there's also some much more unique pedals in there that personally I never would have thought of trying, but as they're there in the Helix and it's so easy to dial them in, I've given them a go. Things like the megaphone effect and the glitch delay, all these real unique sounds that you perhaps otherwise wouldn't get a chance to try, built right into the Helix. So let's talk in and out. The Helix is renowned for having some of the best I/O on the market. Just take a look at this rear panel. Starting on the left side of the unit, we've got the inputs for expression pedals 2 and 3, as the Helix can actually accommodate a further 2 expression pedals for controlling anything you want really in the Helix. You can set them up to be traditional wah and volume pedals, but they can control absolutely any parameter in the Helix. So you could have that be something like a wet-dry mix for your delay. You could have it set up to control the amount of gain on an amplifier channel. Literally any parameter in the Helix could be assigned to an external expression pedal. Next in, there's the external amp control. This can be used to control things on your amplifier, for example switching channels. Then got the guitar and the orgs in, so you could actually run 2 guitars in this if you wanted to, or a guitar and a bass. Then there's the mic in, really good mic channel on the Helix. I've actually used this with my vocalist when all we had was the Helix, and dialing in a sound for a vocalist using that mic pre was a piece of cake. Then there's all the send and returns. The Helix actually has 4 send and return loops for patching in external effects. So those could be pedals that you still want to use with the Helix, or you could be sending to outboard gear, or you could use them for much complicated bigger rigs. Then we move on to the outs of the Helix. We've got the main XLR outputs with ground lift, 1/4-inch outputs, the headphone output, which actually has its own dedicated output control, the Variax connection for connecting Line 6 Variax guitars, and by using that, the Variax and the Helix talk to one another, and you can change all kinds of different things. MIDI in and out, which I use with my JVM, which isn't there at the moment, but it's really easy to set up. I use it to change the channels on my JVM, and it's a piece of cake. Then we get to the digital outputs, so SPDIF, AES, and the Line 6 link, which you can use to connect to the Line 6 power cabs, USB Type-B for connecting to the computer, and through that USB connection you can use the Helix as your recording interface. You can record numerous channels coming from the Helix at once, so you can record all your stereo effects and everything. You can also record the dry signal coming straight from the Helix too, which is great when you want to do things like reamping. You also use that USB connection for HX Edit, which is an awesome piece of software for doing so much. You can use it just like you would the screen on the Helix to build your preset. Just means you've got everything there on a big screen, but it's also how you get all your IRs into Helix and any other presets that you might have bought online, like my presets from benhartwellguitar.co.uk. HX Edit is the way that you get them from the computer onto the unit. And then at the very end, we've got the power connector. So there you go. That is a brief rundown of exactly what the Helix is. It is a guitar multi-effects unit, but it is also so much more than that. With its IR capabilities, its USB recording, its myriad of amps and effects, the fact that it's built like a tank and can withstand the rigors of being on the road, it's an absolute beast of a unit that I'm really happy with. And for all those reasons, that's why it's been my #1 unit for the past 5 years. So hopefully that's given you an insight into what the Helix actually is and what it can do. For me, it's been an absolute game changer in the way that I work both live and in the studio. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up below. If you want to watch another video on my channel, you can do it just up here. Don't forget to subscribe, you can do it right there. I'll see you in the next one.